Welcome to today's episode of What to Say and How to Say It, the podcast to help you fix your marriage. I'm Shai Lewis. I'm here with Nina Rosner. Our mission is to help you, Christian married man or woman, navigate conflict and build connections so you can have a thriving marriage. All right, so today our topic is what to say when you want to heal, but there's a fight that keeps getting picked, for lack of a better word. So we have 4 things that you can do today if you just keep finding yourself in a fight and you're trying to move past that. All right, so welcome, Nina. I am excited to talk to you about this topic today.
Yeah, it's a good one. And most couples have some of these unresolvable conflicts, the things that keep turning up. And often they're bigger than, what someone wants the thermostat set at. So digging into this and then, providing some help to people, I think will be useful to folks because everybody's got them. So let's deal with them.
Absolutely. All right, so before we get into that, I just want to direct our listeners to our website, greaterimpactwives.org. There's a free PDF for you, as usual. It's called 5 Tools for How to Stop Walking on Eggshells. We also just added something brand new. It's a marriage assessment where you can take and just kind of get an idea of where things are in your marriage, and then you'll have some steps that follow after that. So check that out when you have a moment. All right, so let's get into this topic. Let's say you're the person, you've done the work to heal, and you have self-awareness, you have new skills that you've developed, you have maybe even been to therapy or coaching or, done all the things, and you keep finding yourself in this same cycle. Mm-hmm. Maybe because your difficult person hasn't done their work, or maybe you're getting triggered, or any amount of things can be happening there. The question I have is it possible to get to a place of interacting in a healthy way when it feels like opposition is the goal? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, I can't be the only one, right?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson this week, and he actually said that if you have a disagreeable personality, and I was like, oh, wait, what? Like that's a thing that I thought I'd just observed this, but it's actually part of the big 5. And his version delineates down into like, how disagreeable are you? But one of his main points was you need to find something that you can compete in and be careful, because otherwise you'll bring that disagreeableness into your relationship. And that then means everything's a competition. And that then means that you're going to try to win every competition that you're in, because that's what people who are competitive do. So, yeah, I was just sitting here laughing as you were saying that. One of the situations that we see pop up quite a bit, which you shouldn't see, by the way, in Christian circles, but we do, is the wife who, and it's usually this way, it's usually the wife. I'm not saying that it's not the men, but most of the time it's the wife who is like, my husband is a flirt. He is too friendly with other women and I don't like it. And, so then they go through the whole process. They spend a year or 2 working through their own rejection issues and their abandonment stuff. But he's still a flirt, right? He's still hugging other women and way too touchy-feely with things, maybe even time spent that's inappropriate, whatever it is. Conversations, friendships with other women that bother the tar out of her because she's like not feeling number one. And the question is, well, is that reasonable? And I would say, well, yeah, because you should be number one friend for him. Like that's a healthy marriage where you're the person that he comes to when he's got stress or whatever. You're his best friend. And yeah, that should be mutual. But she's done all this work, to your point, and then he's still showing up on Sunday, hugging her friends. That's like, top that. There was an article, I'm just going to say this, it's the rudest thing ever, but there was actually an article in one of these teen magazines, and I'm not going to name it. It's secular, but I don't want to get sued.
Mm.
I might, just because we're Christian, I don't want to deal with it. But it was there, and it was all about how to do something sexual with your best friend's husband and how awesome that is. It's like, in what, like, can we please delineate what's worldly behavior and what is I'm a follower of Christ behavior?
Yeah.
And you can certainly go overboard with some of these things, but recognizing that if you're dealing with somebody, and it doesn't have to be flirting, right? Like maybe he drinks too much, or maybe she drinks too much, or maybe, she's spending all of the disposable or so-called savings, so-called disposable on clothing or things or whatever, and there's this lack of unity over something.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's really what you're dealing with, is a perpetual conflict where somebody has a way of doing something and somebody else has a different way. And you have to discern, is there sin here first? And a lot of times there is, which is a shame. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
A lot of times there's sin, and then there's no remorse over the sin. Like that's a whole other thing too. Like, you've done all the work and then the sin keeps happening and you're trying to have compassion, but then they're like, I'm not even sorry. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
so that's a whole nother level.
It really is. And then it becomes the question of, okay, where's the boundaries?
Right.
Yeah. And why is this behavior continuing to happen? I had a client who was, she did all of her own work first and realized that her husband was, like, to the point that it made some of her friends uncomfortable, and they mentioned it to her. It's like, I don't dislike your husband, but he's like way too huggy, and yeah, it's all in public, but I just feel that bothers me. So she told him about it, and she said, I'd like for this to stop. You're making people uncomfortable. And he's like, it's just who I am. She goes, well, it needs to stop, because if it doesn't, we're going to leave church without you. Like
Mhm.
and that's what she did. She took the kids and left him there. She just left, and he was not happy. And he's like, why did you do that? He got a ride home from somebody. And she's like, look, when you disrespect us and our marriage and our family and you model this kind of behavior for my kids, we're not going to hang out for it. I love
Mhm.
you, but that's not who Jesus is. That's not who we are. And you're bothering people and you're not listening. So we're just going to separate ourselves from that when you do that. And it took a while, but he quit.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. It takes a while. So the first thing, the first thing I hear is first set a boundary. The second thing I hear is be prepared for this to take a while. So this might not be you do this five, this not might not be you do this 10 times. It might not even be you do this 20 times. You might have to do this 100 times before
Mm, yeah,
you actually see change.
yes,
And it might be over like not a couple months, it might take
right.
years.
Yeah. And it's got to be consistent, right? So
Mhm.
when and nobody really likes talking about this stuff, but when, like, harshness is the most, we have this entry level boundary that we have people set for themselves in the relationship, which is I don't hang out. I have zero conversation when I'm emotional. And then when I get my emotionality under control and I've matured, and that takes a minute, like 3 years maybe, then then I'm noticing, well, the other person's doing things that are really damaging to the relationship, and my kids are watching this. It's like, okay, wait. So now I'm gonna just, hey, I love you. We don't, this isn't how we treat each other. Let's talk later when we can both be calm. You're respectful about it, but you shut her down. That can go on for years, and you have to hit it every single time. Like,
Yeah.
because when you don't, you teach the other person, well, she doesn't really mean it. And then you're disrespecting yourself. And then what that does is it causes them to disrespect you even further, because
Mhm.
you've taught them, if you just hang in there long enough, I'll cave, which is not a respectful trait.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So here it is. We have use a boundary, do it enough times, be consistent. What about the spiritual side of this? Is it necessary to understand this opposition, this thing that keeps happening over and over for a long time has a spiritual component
Oh,
to it?
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, like we fight
definitely.
not against flesh and blood, right? So,
Right. Yeah. So you don't hate your spouse. You don't, well, he doesn't love me. Like you don't do any of that. It's like, oh, he's listening to the enemy again. And boy, by the way, I did that yesterday morning, so you just, you're on the same level field. We're not any better. Um, so we have our awarenesses of our own sin and then we have our own blind spots. And in a healthy marriage, you got two people that are iron sharpening iron, bringing those things to the other person and loving them through their well-intentioned future behaviors of change. Like they want to do things. And so there's support in that and encouragement. That's what healthy looks like because nobody's perfect. And then there's got to be consequences when nothing happens. Brutal stuff.
yeah. And, it's both sides, right? So, we can have awareness around what's happening in the relationship, but what's more important is what's happening within us, because that's
Hmm.
what helps us set the boundary. And I just can't stress that enough because oftentimes we don't set the boundaries because of whatever's happening with us.
Hmm.
And, you could easily extend that entire dynamic from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years because you haven't done your work. And so I think it's
Hmm.
important to make sure you continue to do the work even if you've been doing it because the enemy isn't giving up, so we have to
Right.
keep going in this fight as well. Okay. One of the other things we also talk about is validation, right? When we want to move in a direction of healing, whether it's ourselves or the other person, validation plays a big part in that. Sometimes it's that opens up the opportunity for things to move in a different direction, even when we do it in the steps when it's just us
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
we normalize what we're feeling and we bring validation to ourselves. That is the step prior to being receptive to the truth that God has
Hmm.
to say to us. Can you speak a little bit about how validation can turn the conversation, even if it's just opposition, the same thing over and over and over again, how it just magically does that for some reason?
Yeah, it takes the wind out of somebody's sails because they're all wound up trying to shove this down your throat because they feel like you're going to be resistant to it, right? That's the expectation. And that's why they're doing that is I got to get you to hear my thing and blah, blah, blah. And if there's nothing fighting with that, there's like it just all pours out, right?
Right.
Yeah. So when we resist somebody's emotion, and
Mm.
and this is you got to pick, well, you just said 2 minutes ago that you don't have conversations when you're emotional. Well, they it's different when you're listening to somebody who is emotional and you're there to help them navigate a situation. That zero conversation when emotional thing is when it's directed at you. Okay. So let's say they're just having a really terrible day with one of their kids. You guys, she's a homeschool mom and she's losing her ever loving mind because the 6-year old was, I'm just thinking of some of my own experiences. They're so stubborn and they won't do their math and they're just being obstinate and they're sitting on the step again because they you know they have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to do school today, and then they get their TV time and all this stuff, and she just fried, right? So that's not a situation where you go, well, I'm not going to have a conversation with you because you're emotional. It's We show up in those conversations helping people feel heard. We're there to help and love in that. And so they're all geared up and that energy needs to go somewhere. And you facilitate, it's kind of like having a balloon and you've got
Mm.
that tiny little opening and they start And if we're not validating, the hole that it comes out of is like it's being pulled and it's just screaming. You ever do that with a balloon? You
Mhm.
hold the,
Mhm.
it just screams and it's loud and it's obnoxious.
Mhm.
But if we are like, yeah, man, that was just terrible, the hole opens up and then you get all of it. It's like, yeah, and I can't believe they blah 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 and da da da. And then you're like, yeah, that must have been horrible. And they're like, yes, it was. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes. Feel
Mhm.
seen and heard, because half of that energy is, can somebody be with me in this? I feel so
Yeah.
alone, feel so crazy. Like this is just feels so dangerous or awful or
Mhm.
whatever. And when we say, hey, I get you,
Yeah.
that's the unity that Christ talks about. Now,
Yeah.
he's with us in our crazy. He's not condoning our sin, right? He was with David when David did some really stupid things in the Old Testament, but
Mhm.
he was with him in that,
Mhm.
listening to the rant, listening to the rage and the hate and all the stuff. And then David came around. And I think that's the human condition, is when we can be quick to listen,
Mhm.
slow to speak.
Mhm.
And I'm going to insert that other verse, when we speak, can we speak life? Can we build each other up? Can we encourage one another? You know, it's so encouraging to hear somebody say, yeah, gosh, anybody would experience this the way that you are. Like, it's so normal. I'm so sorry. That takes a lot of the negative energy out of the person because they've been heard. Then what happens is you have the ability to do something new in that space. You have basically an empty balloon that you can offer something to fill it up with, right? Maybe helium this time. That's fun. And they'll be receptive to that. But that's because the balloon's empty. All the anger and the angst and everything is out because somebody listened and heard them and saw them. And that's the number one complaint that wives have, is that I don't feel seen or heard, understood. That's the number one complaint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably true, if I could guess, for husbands as well. I think we all need that, right?
Mhm.
And I feel like if we could just make a practice of validating in our conversations, in our disagreements, I think they would just go completely different.
Mhm.
And I struggle because I'm like, well, why do we miss that? It's such a small thing, and maybe that's the reason why. But I find that I have to still remind myself, validate,
Mhm.
validate. I think it's easy when maybe it's someone that isn't so close to you, or maybe it's a new relationship. We do that, real easily, or maybe it's just the best friend you have a just healthy relationship with, but it's in the
Exactly.
difficult.
Well,
Exactly.
you just said why. Because, I mean, there's nothing there. The baggage has been dealt with because the relationship is healthy.
Yeah.
So the I'm sorry's have occurred. There's no stuff piled up or in a new relationship, there's no stuff piled up. So
Mm,
you're in this clean, pure space, and you don't have to prove yourself to this other person. You don't need anything from them. You're okay in the relationship. That's what it means to have a healthy relationship. You don't need anything from them to be okay. You're
yeah.
supporting each other, you're friends, you know, and so it's easy for you to give that to the other person. It's when we start getting needy that we start having problems. Eh.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, an eye opener too, is sometimes the goal is to not need, which can sound foreign, right? To a
Mhm.
wife. That can sound like, well, how do I not need my spouse? I do need him,
Mhm.
we're doing this together. We've built something that requires both of us. What do you mean? How do I not need him? Like,
Mhm.
so I think that's part of the work too.
Yeah,
It's really, assessing what is your true need. And that can be a financial need, it can be emotional need, it can be physical need. I mean, these are things that I think we have to step back and say, how can I show up in a way where I'm okay
yeah.
whether I get those things or I don't, because
Mhm.
getting to that place is going to reveal the best version of me.
Exactly. Yeah. You have people, I had a call this morning where we were breaking down how the statement of I can't relax in here, the house is just so messy,
Mm,
just would destroy her. And understandably so. She was also working full time and raising kids, and they had pets in the house, so it was really hard. And she learned that, okay, I needed him to tell me that things were great. I needed to tell him that I was enough, that what I was doing was enough. But for him, he wanted something different, right? So you have two people that have different, quote, needs in that situation. It's like, well, how do you be okay? And I've had to learn to deal with this myself because physically I can't keep my house the way I would love to keep my house. Plus, I've got these two dogs and their toys are always on the floor. So I'm going to train them to put them away, but that's just, you know, it's dogs or kids. Like you just have stuff in your life happening. And I'm not going to do it for them well, kids, but dogs I will and am. But I'm not going to pick all that up because that then limits what am I going to do later, right? And
mm-hmm,
maybe not so much with dog toys, but if I want to garden or, am I going to empty the dishwasher today too? Well, maybe
mm-hmm,
not, so there's a negotiation that as we age and some of us get, some interesting health things that we have to navigate that stuff. Like what is necessary here? And then am I going to think less of myself because I can't do I need to be able to function at this level up here, Martha Stewart style?
mm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
or to feel okay about myself, or can I go, I'd like to be able to do that, and I used to be able to do that. I can't do that anymore, and I'm not gonna. And that's crazy for me to feel bad because I can't,
yeah.
right? And there's other things you can put into the situation there, but it boils down to what do we really really need? What do we need really? Do we really need the money? Well, maybe we don't need the house. Do we really need the luxury hobbies? Do we really need, sex? Well, there's monks. So they're off there proving, and nuns and things, they're proving, no, you don't. You're fine.
Right.
Nobody dies. You
Yep.
know, I'm like,
Yep.
oh, okay. So what do we actually need? And it's like God's pretty clear about we need him.
Ooh, that's good. We need him. And I will just add a lot of those things we think we need from our spouse, he provides for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And should.
And should.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, this has been great. I hope our listeners were able to glean something good today. I just want to quickly recap 4 things. If you're stuck in a cycle where there's just a lot of opposition, one thing you can do is set a boundary. The next thing is listen, adjust your expectation. There might be things that you think you need that you actually don't. Um, Also, validate. Validation can open up the pathway to healing in a way like nothing else. And then finally, recognize you're not fighting with your spouse. This is a spiritual battle. There's an enemy out there that's out to get you in your marriage. And so, having awareness around that will also help you show up better in your relationship. All right. Well, don't forget to check out our website. As I said, we have some new information for you out there. Greaterimpactwives.org is the address. Also, check out this next episode on how to resolve conflict in your marriage, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining.